February 7th, and the Saudi Arabian paper, I think this was it, Al-Nadwa, sometime in February of 1960.
Now you know.
There you go, Astrid.
Thank you.
Never again. See, this is an apocryphal story.
Those are correct questions. People should ask those
They
questions.
should ask those questions.
Here's another apocryphal question about those days, okay?
Oh my God.
Now, I've heard it said, but I didn't hear Bao say it himself. Somebody told me, and I don't even remember who, that Bao said that Baba spoke to him on the last day and said, "Remember this, I'm not my body." Did anyone hear Bao say that?
Oh yeah, he said that
It
at the
was
last
your
episode.
book over here. Lord Mayor.
Yeah, this Yadra thing.
Yadrak meaning remember this.
I have not this body. It's called Yadrak.
Now he said that he had forgotten it for decades, and then so that kind of confused me. Is that
Wasn't
what
it
Bao
in
said,
an
that he had
email
forgotten?
once?
I remember it, but he did say
Wasn't that he
that
had
Baba
forgotten
whispered
it.
this to Yadrak to him.
Now, in Washington, he expanded on that
Okay.
because of yet another tape that we could have brought. It's embarrassing. The
Embarrassing.
tape of the Joe Pine Show.
Oh.
Oh.
I
want to see it.
You
Probably
have to
saw
come
the
again.
original.
Have to come
The
again.
Joe Pine Show.
That was another one of those Alan Burke type shows.
That's right.
Right.
Now, you will be surprised at how possibly the Joe Pine Show, which must have taken place in 1968 probably, related to Bao's being public about an astounding event, which puts into question the ordinary interpretation of what Baba meant by breaking silence, right? At least according to my best recollection, it wasn't too long ago, so, and Barbara, you were there. Bao got very excited when he saw the tape of the Joe Pine Show. Now, I told that story to you, did I not?
I haven't heard it.
Huh, I didn't?
Not at all.
All right, let me tell you that story, and that'll set up the magical connections. Ah, you're lighting me up. Did you just start to...
You light up my life.
This is good, Astrid. This is without even coming.
Well, there's a song for every situation in life, you know
There is.
that.
Especially if it comes to love.
This is February 1st, 1969, 2004, with a group of the key Baba lovers in the Western world discussing significance of theological issues, which will be relevant for the next 600 years. And the setting is that we're discussing an apocryphal series of recollections, which I believe was recorded in Washington on the last visit of Baba Kalchuri, and he's commenting about why he had not told anyone for lo these many years about a phrase that Meher Baba had uttered to him very soon before Meher Baba dropped the body. It had to do with a television show. And the television show was in 1968. It was a time when the so-called Baba Boys of Boston and others were encouraged to aggressively go around the United States and talk about the problems of psychedelic drugs, the impossibility of those drugs producing spiritual experience, real spiritual experience, and subtly to quote Meher Baba on these issues, and certainly to introduce America to Mayor Baba's name. This had been a very, very, there's a long story, and I think I told some of it in my first chat in the creativity tape, but in fact, the local Baba groups helped and would call local or nationally syndicated shows to say would they want to have these, either myself and Rick on, to talk about the spirituality and LSD. And everyone agreed to do it, even though it seemed unlikely. We didn't have a book, we had nothing. Well, Joe Pine was one that people were hesitant to go on because he was the first of the true television shock destroyer interviewers. And his specialty, and his audience loved it, was to tear apart his interviewees who would come on. It was not Jerry Springer exactly, but it was a direct attack. It was direct humiliation.
Famous for inviting his guests to gargle with razor blades.
Yes, things like that. That's the kind of...
Gargle with razor blades.
Yes, that was kind of fun. I'll go gargle with razor blade. Such nonsense.
Okay.
So, we were under instructions to get on as much as possible. And people said, well, how about Joe Biden? We'll go on anything. So, all right. So we got invited. And the first thing we did was this radio show. And on that show, he was quite distant. He looked a little skeptical. But he didn't come down on us very badly. He said that was easy. But then I heard from the producer, he uses the radio show to get material from you to set you up to kill you on the television. So the day we went on was taped in Burbank, California, in front of an audience of, I'd say, 300 or 400, who all wanted blood. There were two acts that day, two interviews. The first was the famous, unknown African animal shaman who created effects by manipulating different animals. He came out in a wild headdress, carrying a small python and a few birds. And he got, he got killed. Joe Pine tore into him, made fun of him, humiliated him. It was worse because the guy didn't know what was quite happening because he was from Africa. And he was brutal. And then the producer ducked into them and said, "You guys are next." So.
Did you have a monitor in the dressing room? Could you see the show?
Yeah.
So you knew what was coming.
So we marched out and we sat on this panel. Rick and I sat behind this kind of panel. And Joe Pine was up on a little pedestal above that where you could look down at it. And suddenly, Joe Pine says, "Well, we're ready to start?" And suddenly, this is a cover, this is kind of an old hangar kind of thing, or stage set. Very tall building. And out of nowhere, and out of the ceiling, flies this white dove and lands right on the panel in front of Rick and I.
The shaman had arranged that.
And, well, Joe Pine was shocked, but Rick and I said, "White dove? That's one of Baba's symbols. I guess it'll be okay." Then the music, Joe Pine, "Get that damn bird out of here!"
So right after Baba's
it had escaped from the shaman's cages.
Oh, so see.
So,
I know that.
so the show goes on, he starts to interview us. And we talk about Alice, we also talk directly about Baba. We set up Rick to talk about Baba. and I was talking about LSD. And then Joe Pine made a couple of comments, which I'll come back to, about Baba's silence. I will come back to that because that's the link. And the thing went on, and he wasn't too bad. He made a couple of disparaging remarks. But it was like he was laying a trap for us. And then we saw what the trap was. He said, well, you've said what you had to say. Somebody here who doesn't think that way. And up from the audience to a podium in the audience comes this very good-looking, well-spoken, presentable UCLA graduate student who was a happy LSD user. And he was sent to destroy our argument. And there was an introduction. The audience roared. And this is a joke. What do you have to say about what these guys said? And I figured he'd been prepped on Baba because the producer had come in just before. It said, why don't you go? This Mayor Baba hasn't spoken for 40 years, right? I said, that's right. Ah, good. So we knew something and so it starts, and we're kind of hanging on to the panel already. The tension in the hangar is great. And the guy gets up and he says something like, well, what these people have said, it's all well and good, but he pauses. And then it's like he's formulating his thought. Then he repeats. What they say, they're well and good, but. And his kind of eyes look glazed. And he said, but, and he faints dead away.
No.
Oh no.
Everybody is
Pandemonium.
Audience is crazy. The technicians are crazy. Joe Pine is crazy. And
But not the two of you.
huh?
Not the two of you.
No, we're sitting there. What?
Bring back the dove.
It says,
Cue the dove.
so they stop the tape, and Joe Pine says, "I hope you idiots got that on tape." Well, then Rick and I rushed down to see if the guy was all right, and he just started to get kind of conscious again, and he's smiling. He said, how are you? Are you okay? He says, yeah, I'm fine. And then his wife rushes up from the audience, and she's very concerned. We said, does he have, is this a possible seizure or anything? No. Was he feeling badly? No, he wasn't feeling badly. And did he not eat or something? No, there's no reason for this. There's no reason for this. And he was starting waking up. How you feel? He says, great, actually. I feel great. And he was happy as a little bear. And they kind of carried him off. And the cynical producer runs out and says, this will be an object lesson for millions. And so the tone completely changed and the tape started running. I wish you could have seen the pandemonium. It was great.
You have a tape of this.
We have a tape of the actual show, not of
the
what
pandemonium.
happened in the middle.
Okay.
Now you see the guy fainting. And Joe Pine trying to be cool. And then of course he goes back and says, this happened a lot with the LSD users. We said, well, certainly, this kind of thing can happen. It's not that. So he was very sympathetic at that time. And
Oh, Baba.
then what happened was, that became a very, very popular tape. popular segment. This show was syndicated to about 15 million people. Apparently, we later learned this was one of the most popular shows.
They asked for reruns
Oh,
of
yeah.
this show.
And,
Get the guy fainting.
and we know several Baba lovers who that was the first time they ever heard of Baba. Now,
Wow.
I haven't lost the thread
Oh,
yet.
coming back to the, yeah. what-
Back to the theme.
Yeah, they're.
Now,
Breaking silence?
in fact, wait a I'm gonna have to take one more curve here.
Okay.
One more parenthesis.
One more parenthesis. So it turns out one of those people who had heard of Baba on the Joe Pine show was the wife of a Baba lover in Wisconsin. His name is John Bader. And she was getting sentimental about the first time. And she nudged her husband, couldn't we try to find a copy of that show? I'd love to see that show. I saw a picture of Baba. So John, being a good husband, does a lot of research. He also contacts Victor Sackler at Sufism. And between them, they find the owner of the copyright. And they find that in fact these shows had been preserved in an archive in New York City. Oh, are we going to ask something? No. Just adjusting your glasses. And inquiries were made. Well, the people who owned the copyright were a little skittish about it. I don't know why. Joe Pine had died after Phyllis Frederick, who was then the head of the Baba Group. I will finish this, Tina, before 3:30. So you have to hear the punchline. She saw fire and smoke coming from his throat. And in fact, he contracted throat cancer
Wow.
and died. Talking about gargling razor blades. Anyway,
Wow.
so
Ah.
it turned out that simultaneously, people were videotaping their life stories with Baba and Sufism in California, and Victor thought that some excerpts from the shows, one of which, this was kind of a classic example of Baba manipulated a television performance to spread his name and to get his point across. So they really went on a hunt and they identified it, and about 2 years afterwards they actually were able to purchase a copy that was not to be circulated, but to purchase a copy for a non-profit organization. Well, so we had a copy, we saw it. John was coming down
When was this that you obtained the copy?
about, I'd say 4 years, 3 years ago. Maybe.
Okay.
2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. 2.5 years ago. Maybe 3 now. And so John came down for Bao's presentation in Chevy Chase in Washington and wanted to show him the film. Now it turned out, of course, that this was not the show
No.
that she had learned about Baba. It had been a subsequent show where Phyllis Frederick came on,
Oh.
and who was in fact utterly destroyed when we set her up. Nonetheless, there were two comments that Joe Pine made about Baba's silence. One was, "Al, I bet you when he gets home he talks to himself, you know." The other was,
Very natural thing to say.
right, and the other one was, and this was a significant one, well, after 40 years you wouldn't be able to talk.
Yeah.
Now, Bao, in his explanation, said that he, although he was dead sure this happened, he wasn't imagining it, he knew the effects on the Baba lovers could be relatively strong. He was very reluctant to talk about it. But the one thought he had that nagged at him for not talking about it, was the potential criticism that Mayor Baba would not, in fact, be able to speak after that time physically. And so it wasn't a voluntary keeping of the silence that was not broken, if you will, or a silence that could not have been broken physically. So when Bao saw the show and he heard that comment from Joe Pine, he said, that's it. I was worried about it. That's the signal. So it was at that point that he felt he could publicly disclose the Yadrak, and that Baba had known that eventually he would see this, and he wanted to reassure Bao, this among other things that Bao's reasoning happened, but that he knew that Bao would have been terribly concerned that the criticism of Bao could not physically break his silence would be unanswerable. And he took the Yadrak, which means remember this, to be the signal to remember that in fact he was able physically to speak. And to forever do away with the theory that Meher Baba was not doing this consciously and voluntarily, but in fact being physically disabled. So I'm glad you asked that, because it really went around. Now that, I think the exact, Bao was not reluctant to talk about it publicly at that point. I think that's recorded, but it was.
Just
it was
for
a
those of us
single
who
word.
haven't seen that tape or heard Bao say it, could you just briefly recount the actual incident as Bao remembers it?
It's just that at the best of my recollection here, that at some point,
On the last day.
I think it was on the last day,
No one else in the room.
no one else was in the room.
Okay.
The evening of the
Evening before, I think.
The evening before
Of the
The
30th.
of the 30th.
9, 10,
Gestured
11.
Bao to come over and whispered to him, but strongly, Yadrak.
Remember this.
Right, and gestured appropriately.
I am not this body. Gesture.
No, he didn't say, I'm not this body.
What did he say?
That was just that word.
Just remember this.
Right. I mean, he said, he gestured, I'm not this body at other times.
Okay.
But this was the, at least from Bao's point of view, from what I understood he said, this was definitely linked specifically to the issue of Bao's being able to.
Able,
Speak-
physically
speak.
able.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And certainly broadened. It has been broadened. The notion of Baba's breaking the silence has been much broadened since the old days.
Okay.
So it wasn't, I don't think it was a shock to people. I don't think. I didn't get that feeling. Nomi, were you there in Washington?
I
That
didn't
was-
hear the public talk.
In the public?
But I think, actually,
He said it at
he
the-
said it,
at the
when I
microphone.
heard him talk about this, I think was it Gene and Phil Ludwig,
There was a
the
big
year
shock.
before.
It was a big shock?
There was a big shock a few years earlier when Erich talked about a different incident in Mondley Hall where Bob went, like that. And I was involved in it because I made a transcript, someone had a tape, and I transcribed the tape, and Phil and Jean and Nashwan heard that I had it, and Nash was gonna put some other story, and I had the actual thing, and it was published, and it wasn't such a big deal here in the West, but I got some very harsh letters, a letter from Mani, and he got one from Erich. In India, it caused a tremendous disturbance among Baba's lovers.
Really?
And it took a few years before that settled down. And that was not the Yad Rock, that was just, it was within like the same week, I think. But it was that, That's more or less the sound Erich made imitating.
That's interesting. There are many, many, many reports of Bao making sounds over the
Yeah.
years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, clearing his throat. And, yeah.
But this was
Chuckling.
frighteningly loud.
Chocolate.
Very loud. Although he could have kept, his lips were sealed, but he still could have gone.
His lips were
Turning
so-
red in the face, you know. And
So, yeah, and I think the Indians were a little classic. So the notion now, which I think had been interpreted a lot more mystically and broadly about the breaking of the silence, not being so much limited to a point in time,
Right.
but a process. And Bao was talking about it a lot in Washington because he was so excited, and that's all I could talk about. Grabbed us at the airport saying, "This is fantastic, this is incredible." And he really was so happy.
Because he had seen the Joe Pine tape
because
and made the
that-
connection.
He had made the connection, and he knew, and that was to him
The permission to.
the permission. That was to him the permission.
I mean, I don't know how people felt about this, but I almost, it didn't affect me in a way. I kind of purposefully forgot about it, or I was in denial about it. I don't know, you know. How do the other Mondali members relate to this story? Do they just accept this totally, or?
I think, I mean, why wouldn't, well, there are not many of them.
Yeah.
But, I mean, perhaps you know, but I think they would believe.
No, because you know the reaction to your story, and you know, in light of that, I wondered what was the reaction of, you know, I don't know. I guess Monty never heard this story.
Among the Mondali, the reaction to that was very diverse. There were other Mondali there when Baba made the sound,
Okay.
but and I think of what Baba said, the reaction will be diverse, and it was. And I thought also there's a discourse that Baba gave where he said, "I will break my silence with my physical mouth as well," and he talked about with the lips pressed together, saying And I think in the West we.
Bye, Tina, thank you for
Bye,
coming in.
Bye.
I think in the West we were more geared into the deeper meaning of the silence breaking, and it was like, well, it was nice to know that Baba did that, and if he hadn't, it would have been okay.
Right.
But in India, it was the Mondali went through a torrent of queries at Mondali Hall by letter, by cable.
So, because Bob lovers didn't want to think they'd missed it.
Right. In a way, one could almost say, well, that incident with Bao is perhaps another way of Baba telling us, you know, you're expecting actually something to happen where the sky opens and something happens in the historical dimension, and it's actually something else. You know.
It's like breaking the silence in the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You had to be dressed well for that.
Yes.
But Eric said that he thinks that he did break his silence. Baba, I remember we sit in the hall, the same question, and Eric said, I never heard it, but I think because you guys come here,
Right.
that after he dropped his body, you know, people all over the world, even from Russia, came, you know, to Baba. So Eric said that it means that Baba did break his silence. In our heart,
Yes,
we
yes,
start
yes.
here.
That's what he always said. It would
This
not
what
be
they
public
said.
because they wanted to rent the Hollywood Bowl, and because he said, you really think that I would give a speech here, and I'm going to speak to the hearts of people, right? He always said that. I mean, that it wouldn't be audible, right?
And speaking of
When Eric-
us, his lovers, he said, the words I have not spoken will come to life in them.
When Erich told that story in Mondali Hall, which I felt Baba was pulling it out of him, because Merwan kept prodding him, and he had never
Really?
told the story before.
Oh.
And he finally went, I guess Baba has brought about this time to let it out. He told the story.
What
and
year was that?
This was 92, around Amartiti time.
This is the Bao story or the Urge?
This is the Erich.
Okay.
And he finished the story and he said, true to his promise, he has broken his silence. So, and at that time, he had no problem with the tape being copied, given to people, because someone had a tape recorder. But when Mani heard about it, suddenly everything was pulled back.
Really, the tape was
Yeah.
pulled back?
Yeah,
Really?
that's kind of why we got in trouble for being part of letting the story out. But Nosh said he had blanket permission to publish anything in Mondali Hall.
Got it signed in 1952. You know,
Like
blanket,
that.
yeah, blanket permission.
He said that they didn't, he had kept going back for permission for story after story, and they finally said, anything that we say in Mondley Hall, you have permission. But that story wasn't expected.
No, I guess.
So I guess the story you're telling has prompted Bao's awakening story of this Yad Rock thing. So after that, we heard the story.
Let's see.
It must
His-
have been, because if
His trip to Washington
right,
was
and then the
last year. And I think it was last summer. Now, did anybody hear about talking about that before then?
Oh, yes.
in the awakenings, yeah. But maybe he hadn't made the connection
I think
as
it
to
was
the meaning of it.
Silence Day 2000,
something.
I think.
Oh, really?
It came out, it either Silence Day or Baba. It was a Baba occasion,
Yeah.
and
So
it was a few years back.
Or maybe he was able to make the connection as to why.
Why?
Yeah. Why it was, yeah.
And maybe
Interesting.
not so much having permission, but not having to feel guilty about it.
It's true.
Not that he would necessarily feel guilty
It's
about
true. There were different stories. Barbara spent time with the Mandali, and some, but all these are just stories. That some of the Mandali had some reservations about Baoji's awakenings and all this. And it's like, yeah, that he did it on his own, right? So,
Especially with the tape on, I don't want to repeat some of the different things I heard from Mondley after that, but some of them were very intense and diverse about the Erich, the story.
the Irish,
Yeah. It's understandable. Alaba, say, reacted very differently
Really?
than Mani.
Now, Alba wanted a catastrophe, didn't he? He
Yes.
wanted
All of us.
a big,
He's a
a
true.
big bang. He wanted the Big Bang sonics breaking.
Yes.
Which may still happen.
Which could still happen.
I heard him say some very
In Iran.
harsh things in India on a subsequent trip, and I was just grateful he didn't realize I was the other guy involved in publishing this story.
Oh, no, really?
There are
Well-
some explanations for things that don't really sound like they're all that credible. Like the book, that somebody just happened to find some pages of this book, like in some cabinet place, and all of a sudden now that they're publishing these actual pages of this book, but there's just these pages, and it was just there in the cabinet. We didn't
Well-
know.
In Erich's brothers, Meron Jesawala, that's the right?
I don't know what I
Is this
remember
the
is
book in his own
somebody-
hand, or these additional
Yeah, in his own
pages?
hand.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But there are
those-
additional things they found, right?
I'm talking about those pages.
I've got a
that ended
feeling
up-
they'll be finding more and more
They
things.
did a
for
wonderful
years
job
and
with
years,
that
yeah.
book, though, and Ward Parks and the people who worked on it.
And the material was fascinating.
Fabulous material.
But I'm saying the way it was brought
Yeah,
out
I know.
was like, somebody just happened to find this like in Monty's cabinet or something. It sounded pretty lame to me.
What do you think really happened?
Who knows? I can't speculate what really happened, but the story that accompanied it sounded pretty lame to me.
The Yad Rock story made me feel that Bao could well know about the book and really has the capacity to not say anything until we feel Baba prompting him. In the story that he emailed out, I think it was the 3 times Baba said, "I am not this body," and like on the hour. It was 8, 9, and 10, or 9, 10, and 11. And I think it was on the second time that Baba gestured that and then audibly said Yad Rock. And strong, as I remember, it was very strong that Baba said.
He does not know, because this summer, when he was in my apartment last time, 7 people was there, and we have very private conversations, and I sit with Bao and I said, Bao, listen, stop lying, you know about it. you know about book, and stop telling God, blah, blah, blah. And he says to me, I swear, Baba, Allah, I know nothing, nobody know anything. Nobody knew. Because Baba said, next time I will come after 700 years, this book would be fine, not before. And he was he said, I swear, he was in very good mood.
I'm really glad you confronted him like that. We're blessed to have you.
Nobody else could do it.
Why
I can
not?
say anything.
Because you
about
would get
it.
away
It was a joke, it was not, rude. It was like,
No, I know.
personal joke, and we are good friends with Bob, and I feel, because we sit in somebody asked about book again. It's not what somebody asked, I don't remember who, and he said, no, and one more that time, no, I do not know. And Erich said, he does not know. You can guess, guys, but this is what they said.
The other thing with the Yad Rock email, which I meant to say, and I guess slipped my mind, was that he said that Baba came to him and said, why haven't you told the people of what happened that night? It's all these years have passed, and I wanted you to tell them, and why haven't you told them? And so he said, now I'm telling them.
If that's the case, then it's important as one piece in the puzzle of our understanding of Baba's silence and the breaking of the silence. But I don't know, if we poll everyone in the room, we'll probably have 10 different versions of what that is.
Right, we all have
But
different
for
so
me, that story
filters.
says, you know what, the breaking of the silence with a capital S is not this small body speaking any
Right,
more than
right.
I am my body.
Right,
There's a
right.
link.
Right.
I think there's a link.
There's a link,
There's a
but
connection, but it's not the same.
it's not the breaking of the silence that
Continuing.
drew all those people to him, and that the words I have not spoken will come to life in them.
And we're laboring under our ideas of what time is.
But what brought the people to him if he's not breaking his silence?
No, I agree
I think that he
I
did
agree that he
something.
is. Yes, like he said, I am never silent. I speak eternally. The voice heard deep within the soul is my voice.
Right, because why did I all of a sudden drive to Myrtle Beach, not knowing anything? This is how it happens, You're searching and searching, and eventually you find the right path.
That maybe the point is less about his personal silence or non-silence, as for us to shut up enough to hear
Right.
the voice that speaks eternally. For us to shut up enough to hear that voice.
She's cute. She says, Baba lover, shut up.
That's unlikely.
We have the solution that the Joe Pine show happened then, and we're talking about it now.
Now.
And then, well, that might be real. I don't know. But that's how he functions.
And there was never really except for that show, there was never really a point at which the critics attacked us, at least publicly, in lectures or on radio or TV. Once an audience got after the film saying, looks like this guy has Parkinson's because his hands go like this. But that didn't seem to be that important. But on that show, it was a definite crack. And it was one of the few that was preserved that we had access to.
The Alan Burke show was not preserved,
Not that I know.
Really?
because that was also a neat story, and the way that he just got on your side instead of ripping you to shreds.
I know, it was strange. Somebody called up. I think it was Erwin Luck or something like that, or Eddie Luck called.
Or any luck.
And the show, I tell you, if you hear a Bible lover calling up on a talk show, and you're on, be prepared. We were in San Francisco, and I was doing a show with a fairly well-known local talk guy, a nice guy. And but it was about drugs, supposedly. So Bob Dreyfus said, I'll tell you what, I'll call up just so that we get Bob's name in there. I'll ask you some question about that. He said, okay, fine. So we're doing the interview, and as a matter of fact, I have been able to sneak in Baba's name and talk about his position, etc. And so the hostess will open up to the phones, and the second call came through, I heard his voice, Robert's voice, and he says, "Hey, Dr. Cohen." Yes. Mayor Baba, I understand it says there's 5 perfect masters always in the world. I said, yes. He said, why 5? Why not 7 or 10? And I wanted to say, I'm going to kill you, Dreyfus. I'm going to kill you dead.
You're the shill at this auction. Just say,
Jeez.
the shill.
Oh,
How
man,
do you respond?
was I in a tough position? I had to, and the coach was looking at me. What is that?
What?
I had to dodge the, well,
This guy on
the
drugs?
notion of perfect, it was like there was no background or context for it whatsoever. So it's very dangerous. And Eddie Luck called it then. And then somebody, I think somebody snuck a sign in the audience. Alan Burke's show. It was crazy. It was crazy. But I think I told you about how the Chicago people snuck a sign in, and the guy wanted the show retaped. We tried to get a copy of my appearance on To Tell the Truth. But they wouldn't give it to us because they revived the show
Yeah.
on the Game Channel.
Okay.
That's right.
Like
So,
309.
Why wouldn't they let you have a copy?
because it would be competing with the show
That's airing currently.
What's going on?
So ridiculous.
I know, and
The other 2 guys who were pretending to be you, did they look like you?
no.
What they say?
There
What
are
they
2 other Allan Cohens?
No, this is the.
He went on to tell the truth
Oh,
with Kitty Carlisle and John Daly and all
So
those.
they got to figure out who the real Allan Cohen
Who was the
That's
real?
right.
Will the real Allan Cohen please stand up?
Well, there are more, of course there
Oh,
are.
Bob has
I
such
mean,
a
I saw
nice
one in the
section.
Omega
Yeah.
catalog.
One of the
Not there,
sections
so I
Bob
mean,
has, yeah.
definitely.
Well, that guy was very funny. I know who you're talking about. This guy who wrote a fairly pop mystical book called The Dragon Doesn't Live Here Anymore. He's the Omega Institute. So, turns out I'm invited to give a talk at the Spiritual Frontier Fellowship in Baltimore. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I
Delighted.
Delighted. I went over there, there were about, I'd say 100 people, and there's some kind of almost spiritual discussion group, book club kind of thing. So I give my talk, and there's generally good reaction. There's a certain amount of puzzled looks in the audience from time to time. I thought, well, maybe they hadn't really been prepared to talk about mysticism. I talked a little about parapsychology, etc. Maybe the talk ended, people asked questions. I thought it was pretty successful. And finally somebody came from the audience and said, would you mind autographing your book for me? I said, not at all. Where did they get the Mastery of Consciousness? I was surprised. They handed me a book by the other Allan Cohen. The other Allan
Beautiful.
Cohen was invited to give the talk. Not me.
My God.
So I went over to the organizer and I said, I'm so sorry. I think I'm not
That's why they were puzzled.
who you invited. She said, oh, that's okay. It was good anyway.
That's fine.
That was good.
And they still think you're him.
I've never met, I really want to meet this guy.
What do you write? Where do you write?
Huh?
Did you autograph it?
I did.
That reminds me. You know,
Such a showman.
you know what happened? I don't know if anybody watches this show, The Apprentice, on television. Do you see The Apprentice with Donald Trump, where the guy signed the basketballs and everybody thought he was a celebrity, and he just said, I'm Kwame Johnson or whatever. Here, there's Kwame Johnson, get his autograph. Kwame Johnson, Kwame Johnson. And he's nobody, you know. Some people bought the ball for $5 because Kwame Johnson autographed it.
I wonder if the real Allan Cohen saw that and said, "But that's my book."
That's very funny.
I know.
Baba is continually
The real-
nourishing your
See?
humor.
We're in the realm of illusion. I mean,
No, I did.
you know, that's-
I
the
did
real-
actually have a debate against
The
another Allan. Third Allan.
See? Two
How do you know?
L's? Two L's
real
or
Allan
one
Cohen
L?
plays
In
Two
the-
L's
in
and
the-
an E.
Two
He
L's and
was
an
the
E.
editor of the San Francisco Oracle.
Well, that fits together. I mean,
Psychedelic
Oracle
magazine.
and...
And
That's funny.
and we had the debate at the Steppenwolf Cafe
Oh,
in
wow.
Berkeley. Good crowd. Half of them were stoned. I was the underdog in the debate. It's on the relative value of LSD and spirituality, but eventually Baba's logic overcame the story. So it was the consensus that Allan Cohen had won. But it was very embarrassing because
Which one?
You won.
there was an article on him in Life magazine at that time.
The other Allan Cohen.
Which
in the
one?
late-
Number 3 or number...
Number three.
Number 3.
The San Francisco guy with a long beard. We'll have to look
So,
at. And people started taking this article into my parents' store.
Oh!
They were so sorry to hear about what's happened to your son. Because I was in San Francisco too, and people knew about it. It got so bad that the local newspaper had to publish a retraction.
Oh my
And the
god.
headlines were, Allan Cohen is not our Allan Cohen. Explained the Life article and what I was doing.
I have a question then. You know, we've heard your story, but we haven't heard, well, at least some of us haven't heard the story of your family. You just brought up the fact that there was a store
You've got parents?
with a name like Cohen. I suppose that you were brought up Jewish. I don't know if it was secular Jewish or practicing Jewish. When you accepted the principle of avatarhood and the Christ and etc., how did this go over in your family?
Oh.
Tell all.
Oh.
You had
Well,
parents?
let's see.
This is your life, Allan Cohen, right?
This is your...
If my trusted assistant could get me a glass of water.
You got a drink to that one.
I'll drink to that one. Well, you see, I come from a very esoteric city in the United States. Not really a city, a town, a village.
Yeah.
The hometown of Jello.
Woo!
Yes.
Hometown of what?
Jello.
Jello.
Jelly.
What is that?
Jello that you eat, you know, the...
Jello gelatin.
Okay.
Pudding, that kind of, it's not a pudding, but it, you know, it's like that.
Children's
Yeah,
dessert.
yeah, Jello.
Yeah.
It's like
The one
this.
We used to call
It's
it jelly.
it's what Jews have at weddings. You know, they have big jellos.
They do.
What?
They
At least
do.
they did in I Love You, Alice B. Toklas.
Oh, those were special.
What was the name of this?
Special
town?
Jews.
Special jellos. They were unusual Jews.
After I saw that movie, I thought all Jewish weddings have these big, elaborate jello.
It's a good thing, Dan. It's cheap and you can hallucinate on it very well.
I guess not the Israeli Jews.
Huh?
I guess not the Israeli Jews.
You don't think so?
No, I'm saying the Israeli Jews don't have jello.
She is an Israeli Jew, she should
In
know.
wedding.
You should know. but-
jello at their wedding? No.
We
Just
don't
a
have
different
either.
Russian
Russian
Jews
Jew.
don't, I know.
So we've decided.
So this is only California Jews. California Jews.
Leroy, New York.
Leroy, New York.
Leroy.
That's right, hometown of
Hometown.
All right, so the
Leroy,
story
New
continues.
York.
The story continues.
Well, we've settled two very important issues, Bob's breaking the silence and whether Jews eat jello.
Which Jew
By
is
the way,
the
Jello
jealous?
is
There's a
Jello.
sect, Jews for Jello. Rent that movie, and we'll table the issue until you've rented the movie and we meet again.
It's a Mel Brooks movie.
No, it was Peter Sellers. I love you, Alice B. Toklas. You of all people should know that
No,
movie.
Jews for Jello was
Well, that's a movie idea, you could make a lot of money, you know.
That's a
but,
great movie.
by the script, I mean,
And we're marketing approach.
Enough controversy.
Focus, focus.
No, we're finding it.
In
All right.
fact, I took Barbara last time to the Jello Museum.
At Leroy.
where
Leroy.
is Leroy, way upstate?
Yeah, it's between Rochester and Buffalo.
Ah,
Okay.
Okay.
that's where you're
And-
from.
Yes. So it is a town on a shaky foundation, but nonetheless,
On a Jello Foundation.
Jello was invented there and for many, many years produced there exclusively
Wow.
until, and this is where it all comes full circle, a Westchester County company bought it.
Haha.
And Jello now resides not 10 miles from here.
Ooh.
Where?
A little north, I saw it on the map. The General Foods Division.
Oh, General Foods.
Yes.
So funny.
So Bob.
So Baba.
Alright, so this is it's a small town, it's about 4,000 people. It has one movie theater. It has a central school, which has many people from the farms, the surrounding farms. The surrounding farms are famous for a mystical kind of earth, which generates great onions. The earth is called muck. There's muck farming occurring in the area. And in fact, you'll perceive this, George, the name of the Class D baseball team in nearby Batavia, they're called the Muck Dogs.
Good name. Good
There's
name.
something
Good
for
name.
the trivia.
Very good name.
Muck dogs.
Anyway, my family moved to Leroy from the metropolis of Utica,
Famed for his beer.
famed for its beer and the mafia. And he opened up an appliance and dry goods store called
Thank you.
the Economy Department Store.
Ah,
Yes, where like services, what's the motto? Services are style or something. And so they were Jewish. There were only, I think, 2 other Jewish families in town. We had a very high Italian population. I think because of some of the other industries, we were also the home of the 3rd largest insulator manufacturing company in the world.
Wow.
Yes.
Impressive.
So people worked either at the insulator or in Jello, yes.
or mucking around.
Big stuff.
And anyway, so the family was kind of holiday conservative Jews, which means you went on holidays, for sure. And I don't think there was a big mystical tradition in Genesee County at that time, which was the county. But I didn't really learn about Bob until I was 21 or 22, so it wouldn't have been a high school issue. The drug stuff was a little controversial. Tried to get my father to smoke pot.
Because it wasn't illegal though, that's the thing, that was a big difference. At the time
It was on the
illegal.
edge at that time, I think.
Right.
It wasn't.
LSD was legal for a while until we got too much publicity. It was an investigational drug. Marijuana never quite made it to investigational drug status.
Professor Roachcliffe.
Professor Roachcliffe, right? Although,
Bastard, I'm surprised.
You know this album with Cheech and Chong where he tries to give a speech and it constantly loses it, you know. He can't remember what he always gets lost, you know. He wants to extol the virtues or the great benefits of smoking pot and he can't get it together, you know. Each time he starts the sentence he gets lost, you know, yeah.
that would have been a good clip, you know. There's a lot of educational things in Cheech and Chong. And it's true because in Berkeley, the Black Panthers, who did a lot of marching, and who encouraged people to join their marches, even though they were very much against the police and laws, banned pot smoking during the marches. Because nobody could keep in line. Like when they would turn at the wrong street, you're definitely not going to get together. There's those little lessons that you should have known.
So, coming to Baba and a
Coming
Jewish
to Baba.
family.
He had to compete with a baseball career that never developed properly, and
What was your position in baseball?
I'm not sure about
Shortstop.
8 rows. That's my no. I was a second baseman naturally, but played shortstop and thought that college would be a waste of time. But my relatives assured me that it probably was not, and maybe I could get an athletic scholarship, which Harvard was not giving, which annoyed me. But it annoyed me that the University of Michigan did not give me one. And their baseball team wasn't even that good. So, but my career ended, baseball career ended when, even though during tryouts at Harvard I hit a home run and things like that, a ground ball took a bad hop and hit me in a very sensitive place. And it was very hard to complete the tryout doubled over.
Oh.
So I didn't get in on my fielding. But that was just as well, really. I was not destined. I didn't grow any taller or get any faster. So that was good. Anyway, I think the family took things pretty much in stride in terms of Baba. Although why anybody would want to go to India, was something that seemed a little crazy. But I told you about the meeting, did I not, in Jerusalem with Carrie Ben Shammai's husband, the rabbi?
No.
No.
No. Well, this illustrates certain religious traditions in Baba bump up in different ways. For example, for Catholics, coming to Baba is usually pretty hard. And the reason is that there's not, if you're a sincere Catholic, it's tough to accept Meher Baba as Jesus coming in. Because nobody really supports that except a couple of priests that we know. And certainly because you haven't been told. Same for the fundamentalist Christian, the big thing is that they would know if Jesus would come. I mean, he certainly looked like Jesus, and they'd certainly get some raptures of it. So Catholics have to usually reject Catholicism, and then reluctantly re-accept some of the notions which they're very sensitive about. God and a master and obedience and a set of guidelines which they've kind of rejected. For Jews, it's not very hard at all, because there's not a great deal of concrete theology in contemporary Judaism. When, in 1975, invited to Israel by Naomi's father's colleague, believe it or not, I went to a drug conference, and at that time, Carrie Ben Shammai was the Baba agent in Israel. I think she had one. Etzion was her only student, I think, at the time. And she was very anxious for somebody to come talk to her husband. Her husband was not a formal rabbi, but they called him Rebbe. Very distinguished, Mr. Ben Shammai. Distinguished theologian, expert on Judaism, and in fact in charge of coining all the new Hebrew words.
Wow.
Because Hebrew, I guess like France, you can't, like online you don't hear in Hebrew. They don't import, or they didn't at that time import other words. So they've had to find the Hebrew word for whatever the new term was.
Yeah.
He was in charge of that, right, Naomi?
Yeah.
So he was in charge of that, and he was such an authority in the patriarchal overlay of Orthodox Judaism in Israel. The wife couldn't batter the husband too good. So she said, why don't you come over for dinner? You can talk to him on intellectual grounds about Baba. I said, I'd be happy to come to dinner. And the only time available for the conference was the Sabbath. So I took a taxi from the hotel, and the taxi stops. I can't take you into this quarter. What do you mean? This is the address?
Yeah, sure.
I'll show you. No, it's because there can't be any cars in there. So I had to walk about 10 blocks to the house. There was no electricity, of course. Because,
Is this a highly Orthodox quarter and they have a thread that's
say something
running
about
around the
Yeah,
quarter,
say
and
something.
within the bounds of the thread you have to be...
Yes,
Yeah,
that's,
okay.
that's kind of the principle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they actually used to be very hostile about it. If you drove a car and you'd get stoned.
Yeah.
Literally.
There are places in Brooklyn like that.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So loving.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I thought you were joking.
No, there's a thread, there's a piece of string. If you go to this place in Brooklyn, you see the string on the poles, on the telephone poles. And within the bounds of that string, they're keeping the most strict interpretation of the law.
Yeah, in Israel they don't need a string so much because I think it's Israel. So
The string goes around the whole country.
Has got a string around. No, it's true. It's all holy.
Okay, but in the case of
but
this
in
neighborhood,
this case,
it's-
it's a certain neighborhood. It's called 100 Gates. Me'asharim. It means 100 gates, and it's
It's an especially...
it's especially all
Orthodox.
Yes, it was one of I think some of these very religious quarters were the first that were founded outside the old city of Jerusalem. You know, they were the first one. Anyway, that's a whole history.
so he lived there,
I'm more interested in the story. Yeah.
and he was highly Orthodox himself.
Wait.
She was the daughter of a very well-known rabbi who was like really, I mean, she came from a very, very religious...
I'm curious just about her background then. I mean, how did she come to Baba, and how did she end up meeting Baba in New York and all
Do you
that?
know the story of Carrie? How she... No, I don't. I don't remember. Etzion must have told me. I'm so sorry. I don't have a good memory. But I know she was this woman, which in itself is an issue in the religious, society. And she was the daughter of a really well-known rabbi from East Europe. And I know that she was like considered this crazy woman who was like rushing around talking about Baba, to all in a very difficult environment. and she never stopped. I think she was really a zealot, huh? She was amazing. What was her husband like?
Well, walked in, and there's candlelight, of course, and she's there. We met for the first time and chatted, and then Mr. Benchmai came in. He was this little man, about 5'5", with this gigantic beard, and a very gentle, kind of sweet expression. He was a very, soft-spoken, pleasant, but not very talkative person. You could see he carried a certain authority, certain gravitas. So Carrie's giving us dinner. We're talking about really superficial things. He's not talking too much. He understands English, but he likes talking Hebrew. And we're having dessert, and so Carrie's standing behind him. I said, Mr. Benchmai, I'd like to talk to you about some issues of Jewish theology, of which you're a great expert. So I thought I'd warm up with him. I said, I'd like to know what the really official Jewish position is on reincarnation.
Good way to start
And I
with.
said, in the West, this is an idea that's begun to come into vogue. We know historically that it was an accepted notion in parts of the Judeo-Christian tradition. But many Americans think it's a lot of baloney, and certainly the Christians think it's heretical. And I haven't studied, I don't read in Hebrew, and I haven't studied as much, but I'd be very interested. So I've heard many different reactions of what really Judaism has to say about reincarnation. I thought that was a good warm-up.
Yeah.
Good warm-up for Baba. So he looks at me, he nods, lowers his head, he's thinking, stroking his beard.
Yeah, that's how they do it.
1 minute goes by. 2 minutes goes by. Still looking. 3 minutes. 5 minutes goes by. Finally he looks up to me. He says, well, in Judaism, it's optional.
This guy belongs on the Borscht Belt.
So Carrie looked a little sad. I
Find
said,
the right word.
I said, okay, good. I'm glad about that. I'd like to move on to another. I might as well go for it because
Go for broke, yeah.
I said, there's a concept. It's a concept certainly that we've heard of the Messiah. In different religions, the Avatar, the Christ, but the Messiah. And in America, some Jews are waiting for the return of this figure. Some say it's imminent. Some say there's no such thing as the Messiah. What I'm very interested in what you feel about this concept, about this return. Now Carrie is really, she's really on edge now, because this is getting right on top of it.
Warm.
Now, thought it was safer to ask him what Jewish theology was rather than something like, what do you think about Mayor Baba?
Right.
Wasn't going to work. So he listens. And he nods. The Messiah. That's right, the Messiah. Strokes his After about 3 minutes, he looks up and he says, in Judaism, the Messiah is also optional.
That's not like going.
I love it. Talk about a big tent.
And
Is Judaism optional?
so, but then afterwards, basically his criticism he says, I don't understand why you would need such a thing as this Baba. You hardly have enough time in the day to do the prayers you should do. And to do the rituals, and he prayed many hours a day. So his criticism was, why would you need it? Why would you need it? You've got enough to do as a Jew.
But can it be optional?
But can it be optional? So, in that regard, my parents says examples of American Judaism, there isn't any. You're not going to find anything in the Bible or the Talmud that says, watch out for avatars.
Beware
The
of
avatar
avatars.
comes and doesn't speak Hebrew, you wouldn't listen to him.
At least you did.
At least Yiddish. So, anyway, I think that does account for a slight over-representation of Jews coming to Baba simply because there's no theological barrier, and they don't have that same sensitivity to either plus on Jesus, which makes it hard to say, a guy with a mustache doesn't look to me like, and how wouldn't we have known, Now the Muslims might consider somebody like Baba a great prophet.
But never.
Never
Another.
one with God.
But don't Jews have take issue with don't they have feelings about the fact that there's a representation of God? I mean, we're not supposed to, it's supposed to be so abstract.
The Muslims really don't like photographs,
The Muslims
period,
don't.
and of God, which, for example, was a big barrier to a Bible lover, a Bible liker that Barbara knew well, whose husband was getting very interested in Baba, but he kept bringing back Baba pictures and Baba cards, and she went berserk. She was Muslim. I mean, she liked the message, but it had been so ingrained that a photographic representation or even a graphic representation of God was really in bad taste.
Or of the Prophet.
Yes.
There were a few paintings of Muhammad, the face is white.
Yes, well, they got it from the Jews. The Muslims got it, I think so.
You don't see many pictures of God in Jewish art.
No, I think
No.
that's the whole thing. It's got to be very.
Well,
You don't
you
see
can
any
spell out the
picture.
name.
Like they
Right,
write
and,
G-D.
Yeah, or Yahweh, of course.
Right.
Very sensitive.
Well, they fought wars over that. When you look at the history of Islam, the origins of Islam are steeped in physical, violent confrontation, iconoclasm, tearing down old structures and belief systems, and actually coming to blows over that, with cities, fighting cities, and people dying and shedding blood over that. Yeah, it's a pretty touchy subject. The Kaaba itself was the site of the ancient, the pagan Arabian traditional animistic and, you know, pagan religions, and they had all these idols inside this place. And when he won that battle, Muhammad went in there and basically cleaned the place out. But it required a war to do that.
Yeah, in those times, if you invested in TV, it didn't help a lot. Spread the message.
Invest in television.
Listen to me, punk!
I went to see a movie, Muhammad, Messenger of God.
Really?
Tony Quinn played Ali. They didn't portray Muhammad. You only saw through Muhammad's eyes. And when I went to see it in the theater, there were protesters out in front. Don't hurt Muslims' feelings. Don't hurt. And it's a really good movie, and people would be much more open in the West to Islam. It's available on videotape now.
Really?
But it didn't have a very long run.
I grew up as an Orthodox Christian, and when I was a little boy, we would have films of Jesus in Sunday school, and you didn't see Jesus' face either. You only saw the feet.
Wow.
So the same sensitivity, at least decades ago, was actually still prevalent even in Christian circles.
No, they said, you know that 25th gonna be new movie? Jesus
Yeah, yeah.
Christ?
Oh, yeah.
The
was
Passion.
in,
25th February of 25th.
Yeah,
25.
right.
So
His
you will
birthday.
see the Jew was their fault.
Mel Gibson. Mel
That
Gibson.
was
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Now you're gonna see this.
Mel Gibson, yeah.
Zeke and I
Well, that's
studied
not
it.
news, that's old.
Yeah, but now it will be open for public.
Yeah, but it's a very old interpretation, pre-Vatican II,
Oh.
and that's Mel Gibson belongs to a pre-Vatican II Catholic sect.
And yet it's premiering on Baba's
Baba's
birthday.
Yeah.
birthday.
Baba's birthday,
That
yeah.
is interesting, huh?
Gee.
I thought it was the 15th, not the 25th.
20th.
But I may be wrong.
Which also happens
Alex
to be Ash
said,
Wednesday.
I think Alex Sprinkle or somebody that it's gonna be 25th.
Tell you were saying.
Zeke and I studied at an interfaith seminary. We're actually now ordained interfaith ministers.
Hey!
The webs.
I'm not sure what that means for us. in
Well, what it
practice,
means is
but
you just married Zudair and Allah.
We've done a marriage. We've done a marriage. That's a hell of a thing.
Being eligible.
The thing that's
afraid of. Anti-Semitism.
hard to say. But
What?
the thing about Judaism that struck me that my classmates were all Jewish, and my school was 98% Jewish, and I'm been surrounded. I've been to bar
Not in the
mitzvahs for
seminary.
all my friends. No, growing up.
Yeah, be clear.
And but the thing that I learned in our seminary studies, which I didn't know, was there really isn't much of a Jewish theology in the same way there is in other religions. The sense of a dogma, that so much is optional, and there's difference of opinions.
Absolutely.
It's just fair to say that it's the practice. It's like Sabbath is important as defining yourself as a Jew, things like that. And you may be practicing or not practicing, but as far as beliefs, they're like the tradition is of debate and discussion.
One of the things that I remember, one of the comments that stood out to me in class there was that the Christians define themselves by what they believe, whereas Jews define themselves by what they do, by their practices.
That is very true, the mitzvot, yeah, that is correct. That is probably true. I thought you were going to say they define themselves by what they eat.
That's why when you said it's optional, it sounded quite obvious.
Oh, right.
take some coffee.
The Messiah is optional, but it's not optional what you eat.
But plenty of Jew when I went to the church.
Don't drink milk when you eat beef. That's not optional. The Messiah is optional.
Well, the practice is, the practice is.
On the kosher hot dog.
He likes this, I'm sorry.
So, Alan, are your parents still living?
No.
And you have
But
siblings?
They did, I think they became, I think they liked the Babylonians we hung out with. They came to the Sufi Center when we got married, and, I think they liked it, but they never, see, that's the thing, also when you've got a very diffuse religious orientation, some of the gap is filled. There's not much left unless you're zapped with some kind of yearning for meaning or certainty or truth or uncovering. Most people are not taken with that particularly. They don't think they are. And they're not.
Alan, how long have you guys been married?
This is a trick question.
It may be a trick answer. The question.
I'm sure my wife knows.
I don't actually. But I think it's somewhere around.
85.
It's somewhere around 17 or 18 years. I think.
18 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Do you have any siblings? I think that was the other question.
I
Sibling.
have a brother, a younger brother who's deceased,
Oh,
and a sister now. Sister in upstate New York, so Rochester.
A tolerant Baba observer.
I would say tolerant Bible.
also named Alan.
Everyone's in my family's name. It's like George Foreman. His 8 kids all named George. No, her name is Sherry.
I have a friend named Joe I've become reacquainted with after 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
And we learned he had a daughter and a son, and what's your daughter's name? And he told us. He said, and what's your son's name? And he looked at us, he said, Joey?
Of
course. What
I mean,
else?
what
Alan?
Right.
They had Russian roots, your parents? Or not?
Lithuanian.
Ah,
So it's close.
Close enough.
Yes.
Alan, maybe you could spend a few minutes telling us about, and I'm only being mildly facetious,
Uh-oh.
Sufism reoriented Meher Baba eschatology. That is to say, the Sufism reoriented point of view, if there is such a thing,
Yes.
about the whole meaning of the humiliation, the manifestation, the new humanity, etc. The world to come or the world to end.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else?
Yeah.
The reason I asked the question is because, I'll tell you, I did not go to Meher Baba meetings for many years. I had these pictures all over my house. Sometimes my friends would come over, they'd say, who is that guy with a mustache? And I would just say, he didn't talk for 44 years, you never saw him on TV asking for money. And that was about all that I said about it. And, however, when I then started going to meetings again, what I noticed in the gap, that maybe those who've been going to meetings all along didn't notice it as much as I did. When I stopped going to meetings, we had this grandiose sense of a manifestation to come, but nobody was really very attached to a particular version of it. When I started going to meetings again, I was hearing a couple of different versions of pretty strong opinions about what was about to happen. And one of them was, Bao. And when I heard Bao for the first time after all those years, I went, wow, this eschatology or end time,
Volcano, eruptions, earthquakes.
That's right. This has really evolved in the space of time that I haven't been attending meetings, So to me, it's not important, but I just wanted to know, what Sufism reoriented
It's
thinks
optional
about.
knowledge.
Yeah, I know that. I know. But
No, I mean it's optional to you. This knowledge. It's not essential. But
no, what I
you'd like to
you
know.
don't- my opinion doesn't matter. That's what I mean.
Well, I've got good news on the short term. There was a time, this is just historical fact.
6 o'clock.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah,
Okay.
leave pretty soon.
Quarter.
Yeah, quarter of.
We actually, last trip, we walked all the way to Philadelphia
What, from where?
on the train.
On the train, because we
There
couldn't
was
get
Oh, you
seats.
walked
There was
on
a
the
thread
train?
around
Oh.
the city, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll leave earlier. We'll leave earlier.
That would be good.
There was a time in Sufism when the famous oil crisis occurred of,
70s.
74.
Good. And we had a couple of people, well, Don Stevens and Lud Dimple, in the oil business. And they made us feel, and merchants as well, this could well be the end. This could be.
This is it. This is it.
How about the avian chicken flu? I think that's the beginning of the end.
The chicken flu.
Chicken flu.
And so it was enough that, and probably it was a wonderful exercise. The Sufis got together a program called, I think, ERA. I forget what it stood for, but it's not Equal Rights Amendment. It's something to do with, I forget. Anyway, but it was what would we do if there was really a crisis, and to get ready for it. Food stocking,
Oh, wow.
communications plan, disaster planning.
It's
Like
2000, it's like 2000.
Like the white
okay,
Aryan
what was
nation.
it called? When the computers?
Right.
Those ideas were in the air.
We didn't
The
talk
Mormons,
about
the
guns.
Mormons do a good job of that. And so
You were
people were burying barrels of diesel fuel in their backyards, you know.
Man.
And everybody, we in fact got a very famous financial expert who was a Mormon who also had a huge company that sold dried foods and stuff that would last for 10 years, stuff like that. And the doctrine had to be developed that no, you weren't to keep guns in your house, to keep the hordes away from you, and trust God in that. And then you might be isolated from your peer group, so we had workshops on how to communicating with people who didn't necessarily share your demographic.
Wow, you went that
values.
far. Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And there were random, people were picked out to have random recreational times together, people who didn't know each other, to do things, that was a lot of
Far
fun.
out.
Well,
Training for the
so now, the
socialization.
good news is that we haven't had such a call recently, even though we have a professional disaster planner in the order
Oh, really?
who really wanted us to be ready for the 2000.
Okay.
Y2K.
How could you be ready?
Well,
How?
there were a
Whatever
lot of
happens,
ways to
happens.
become ready. You'd be surprised, from walkie-talkies to all kinds of
Yeah.
transfer of your assets into things that would be more fungible, to what to expect in terms of electronic breakdowns. And as hard as our disaster advocates could push, neither Merchant Mackay nor Merchant Khan really got terribly concerned about it. In fact, we had somebody working for that, for the Y2K people in Gore's administration. So all I can say,
Gore's
particularly
administration?
Gore,
Vice President.
yeah, Gore had the
Okay.
governmental reform effort in his office, which included the Y2K preparation, stuff like that. So now, of course, you could say that both the natural threats, the volcanoes and earthquakes, and terroristic kinds of threats are much at a higher pitch, but in general, I would say particularly with tape running, becomes a much milder interpretation.
We don't have to release it.
Oh, just turn it right off.
Oh no, I know, I think it's going back to you. Blackmailed for years. The feeling is, a gradual, perhaps rough transition for the next 600 years. We were talking last night, Tony, I don't think it was necessarily you, but that the Mandali asked Baba, or Baba asked them their choice, would they like one serious catastrophe or
Lots of little
Yes,
ones.
small.
Series of
small.
Yeah.
Oh, they said a series of.
And they chose a series of small, what Baba called brush fires, small wars instead of
No
one
more world war.
big war. And that seems to be the pattern. And there's always a war. People are always, there's genocide every 3 years or so. There are natural disasters that kill 20, 30, 40,000 people at a glance. There was 9/11, which really is insignificant in terms of causes of death in the United States. Even though psychologically it's not. More people get killed walking across the street, literally. So the feeling is that I take is that there is, it's still the Kali Yuga. We're working on the new humanities waking up. America is got a lot of spiritual energy, but negativity still is dominant.
Greed.
Hmm?
Greed.
Greed. Greed is central. As our cab driver said last night. Money does anything.
And let's not forget lust and anger now.
Lust and anger are secondary to money in New York.
What about
Not in
Washington?
California.
California, it's not good. Money. Money's
Lust
everywhere.
goes much higher in California.
Power is Washington.
Yeah, Washington's power. Money doesn't cut it in Washington.
Yeah, Washington is power, that's true.
Isn't it power in the service of greed, though?
Yeah.
It's power in the service of control. No, it's in the service of dominance, of control. Because in Washington, the notion is control and power can always make money. But just because you have money doesn't mean you have power. So it's the ability to control wide events rather than to enrich oneself. And self-enrichment is good, but it's more in the service of controlling everything. And so these forces out there, and it's I don't know, what is the feeling? It's probably just going to get worse before it gets better. But spirituality is definitely cooking too. Now Baba also, Allan and I hope that you've studied this thoroughly and are willing to give us a discourse, that Russia holds the key. How do you interpret that?
I won't tell you how I won, but we asked Erich and Money and Bao, and they said that Baba never give an answer and nobody know. You can only guess.
It's optional.
It's optional.
Wasn't China in there also at some point? Yeah, it was Russia and China?
When he
Well-
comes back. China's there when he comes back.
Okay.
China was relevant at a time when there was a border dispute
That's
between
right.
India and China. And Baba said offhand, well, not to worry, Chinese were not going to go beyond a certain
Right.
point, and they didn't.
Because the Avatar is in India.
Right.
I think Edgar Cayce also mentioned Russia, and he
Yeah.
mentioned that the cultures moved from east to west. Was Rome and then Europe and US, and now it probably goes again to Russia. He mentioned that, I think, dreaded or something. I remember reading that.
Well, it was interesting. This fellow Jeff, who's just in India, said there was a lot of Eastern European people there, and Russian, Slovenian, Babalars.
America?
Yeah,
Really?
a lot.
Not
I
Russia.
think there's a whole other level to Baba's comments on the
Yugoslavia.
geopolitical sphere, particularly things that were topical at the time. I think his word on these things changed them. So, I mean, I think even to the extent where you talked about 3/4 of the world being destroyed,
Yeah.
I'm very open to the idea that by stressing that, he diffused that in a tangible sense. But I think him commenting on these things was being divine, and being that divine power in those thoughts, became part of the transformation of what was happening.
But also, in that
That's just my
particular,
feeling.
but he also has said certain things he said in his language, some things he said in our language.
That's right.
There was a whole
That's important.
thing there about around 3/4 of the world, I remember. And he went through explaining what was in his language, what was in our language, and what was in both. So it wasn't clear what he was saying.
Well, a nice thought about that is
He
that,
interpreted the sanskaras, the
3/4
3/4 of sanskaras
yeah, that
will
would
be
be,
destroyed.
that'd
It
be
depends
nice.
how much sanskaras you have. So 3/4, if you have Baba, so
I don't know.
That's what- that's the way Bob's usually.
Yeah, I don't know, I
this
don't.
what
I think these same questions have different answers depending on what level you're asking them at.
5 minutes.
If I've been,
Oh, gee.
Well, let me ask a very specific question. I've been running through Lord Mayor a little bit. I noticed there was a connection between Ivy Deuce's husband being in the oil industry, that Don Stevens was there, and then Bob explicitly said, keep the oil in Arabia for America, or something to that effect. Was there anything more expounded on that?
not that I know, but I found that to be curious also.
Right.
A very curious connection. And, so did you say you had been researching
This is in Lord Mayor, some of these statements. I'm looking at.
Aramco?
Aramco and American Oil Company, and making sure, I just said, tell your husband to keep the oil Arabia for America, or something to that effect.
Is the DVD in there?
No, I put it back.
Yeah.
It's in Ivy
Is
Deuce's
it Dan
book, I read something
Stevenson's
about
It's
it.
in Lord Mayor.
So I'm gonna look that up
Yeah.
at home. Because I
Yeah,
remember
that's-
something too.
That's a very interesting connection.
So that you get a seat on the train this evening,
Yeah.
I think we should probably do it a little bit, with a little bit more time to spare than we did last time.
Can you drive through the city? We don't go to the city. Oh, you don't?
No, I'm gonna give them a ride, it's okay, I'm gonna give them a ride down to the,
No, I'm just thinking about the rest of us. No.
Can you guys give us a ride to the train station? You have a car?
Yeah.
The train station's just right here in town. Okay,
But,
she can get a couple people.
yeah, just before we break up though, Alan, any final words to the wise, and maybe we can have a moment of silence?
yeah.
Words to the from the vice. Words
That's
from the
all.
vice.
It's called the conflict of interest. Let me see, I think, I thought the atmosphere last night was very strong and very powerful. And I think that I've seen perhaps not a shift, but some movement, growth, or deepening in the folks in New York. And that's a happy prospect, since we're going to need every erg of it for the Kali Yuga antagonism plan. And this was, I think, we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a world event or two that got kicked off during this weekend.
This week.
Yeah, I'm wondering what it might be.
The year of the monkey is supposed to be a year of upheaval.
That could be a good thing. Be a good thing. Anyway, I don't know. I'll do Hafiz and I'll pick a quote. How's that?
Yeah.
Ah.
Ah.
Ah. Oh.
Didi.
This has to do with that. This has to do with there are some yogis who can bodily walk on water or fly in the air without the aid of external means. And yet all of this is no sign or proof of their having experienced divine love. Weighed on spiritual scales, these miracles have no value whatsoever. The curious might well very occupy their minds with these things, but they're best relegated to the background as insignificant. The real lover of truth passes by these things without becoming entangled with any of them. He cannot afford to be distracted or diverted from his real objective. That is, attaining union with God and releasing the radiance of his purity and love. From the spiritual point of view, an honest householder is 1,001 times superior to the ascetic and mystic who works wonders by way of miracles without realizing the truth. So cut down your miracles.
One less miracle a day, please.
Use the train instead of teleportation.
Now, was that Baba?
Yes.
Okay. No, because you said Hafiz, you know. And
Hafiz.
Oh, no, I was referring to the tradition of
Opening.
open.
Doing a Hafiz.
Just see what message might come out. All right, perhaps we can have a 30, at least long 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's not a good idea to have a silent. 30 seconds.
I think Allah is breaking her silence.
Yes. Well, no. One moment, 1 minute, hello. I will keep my silence.
Okay, you keep us for 1 minute.
By the
Okay?
time there.
You got it? Do you have a second hand? No?
George has. He's meditates already.
Okay.
1 moment. Minute.
Yeah.
Dee-dee.
Good? Good?
You sit with Billy? And I said, Billy, let us shut up. Come. And we sit together. 5 minutes, half an hour, God knows. We open eyes, so happy. You know, Baba is here. Baba is here. We feel Baba. We call Baba and he comes. Do you feel Baba now?
You feel him now.
Now, I'm gonna give this back to you for sure, okay? Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
So it should be second part.